Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Katarzyna Pisarska and I'm a chairwoman of the Council of the Kazimierz Puławski Foundation. This is a great pleasure for me today to lead this podcast, this discussion with our distinguished guest who actually just arrived from Washington, D.C., I think through Stockholm, Kurt Volker, Ambassador Kurt Volker, a distinguished diplomat who has been the ambassador of the United States to NATO, later, of course, the acting assistant secretary for Europe in the State Department, and finally, special representative of the US government for Ukraine. Today, he's a distinguished fellow of one of our partner institutions, Center for European Policy Analysis, CIPA. Kurt, welcome to Warsaw. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Kurt, of course, there's so much to talk about, not only on the transatlantic relations, but on global issues. But we have really not even half an hour, so I'll just, start with the questions that are of the largest interest today in Warsaw. And because you are coming from Washington, my first question is, what's happening with U.S. assistance for Ukraine? We're watching these pictures coming from Congress. We're extremely worried. A lot of us are worrying whether the United States will continue to provide military and financial assistance to Ukraine. So what would you say to our audience here in Warsaw and beyond?
Well, I'm very confident that the assistance is going to be approved at the level that we're talking about, so over $60 billion, which will be enough military aid to cover Ukraine for all of next year. It didn't get passed this week in Washington for a couple of reasons. But what is important to start out knowing is that the majority of the public, the majority of Republicans, the majority of Democrats all support aid to Ukraine. And same in the Congress. The majority of the Republicans support aid to Ukraine, the majority of Democrats as well, both chambers, House and Senate. However, the Republicans are focused on their own voters, who are very upset about the lack of control of our southern border. We've had 8 million illegal immigrants come in during the last 3 years. We have tent cities in most of our major cities now that are illegal immigrants. Some of that brings crime, some of that brings a drug problem, fentanyl, where we've had over 25,000 Americans die of fentanyl poisoning. That's coming across the southern border. So there's a real outrage about that. And the Republicans they have to be able to say to their voters that we did something about this. Because if they just say we gave $60 billion for Ukraine, for their security, and we didn't do anything for our security, that's not going to be a politically sustainable position. So they need to have something on that. The White House doesn't agree with that point of view. And so they wanted to avoid doing anything about the southern border and say, just pass the Ukraine aid, and Israel as well, but don't touch anything on the border.
Why?
The Democratic Party has a constituency that is in part Hispanic, in part sympathetic to the very poor people, that wants to take care of immigrants who come from the societies that are severely dislocated. So they want to keep the border lax. And they therefore just want to kick this down the road. What happened this week is you had both the administration raising the temperature, saying, if you don't pass this aid, it's going to be a disaster for Ukraine. They're going to run out of money. Russia's going to win. You're going to be to blame. And you had, the head of the Office of Management and Budget saying this, Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, saying this, President Biden saying this. And then they bring over President Zelensky from Ukraine to lobby Congress to tell him, pass the money, pass the money. Well, this really irritated the Republicans because they support the aid to Ukraine. You don't have to convince them. They know they are going to support this. But they're being ignored when it comes to the southern border. And now you're bringing over a foreign leader to come lecture us about this without doing anything on the border. What they should have done is work this out in advance. They should have had a compromise be over something on the border and Ukraine and Taiwan. That is now what has happened. So you've seen the Senate put this together just in the last couple of days. They're going to stay through the weekend. They'll vote on this.
So you think that the package might actually...
The package will get done.
Before Christmas?
I think in the House probably only in January. So the Senate will act before Christmas. The House has already gone into recess. They'll come back in January. And as long as you have the southern border package there, they will vote to approve it. And you'll have 350 votes probably.
Absolutely. I mean, we've come accustomed to domestic policies heavily influencing foreign policy decisions and processes. But I think, here in Europe, without going into domestic issues in the United States, I mean, the message is that any American aid, especially military aid, may fall hostage to American domestic politics. So don't you think it's a bit dangerous to have this, actually blocking aid so existential for Ukraine and for Europe, and especially our region here in Poland? And does that not send a message both to the allies and most importantly to Kremlin that you can play along, with domestic politics in order to block critical support for allies and those fighting, also in the interest of the United States, because as we know, Ukraine is effectively dismantling the Russian army for peanuts, if you look at it in terms of
military. That's true. That's very true. First off, I don't think it's taking a position to call it domestic politics. That would be the Democrat position. The Republican position would be to call it national security, because it is our own border. And I think national security issues do kind of get looked at as a whole. Second, the good news here is that we're all democracies. So we actually have leaders who are accountable to their own voters, and they've got to be able to make decisions that are sustainable. And so we just have to be patient with the fact that we are a democracy. So that's what's happening here. And I would also just reiterate that the debate is not about Ukraine. No one is arguing among the major parties here, the bulk of both parties. No one is saying that this is a bad idea. You do have a vocal minority of Republicans, about 15 members in the House, about 2 senators, who oppose the aid to Ukraine. But that's not significant. Those votes are not going to matter. You also have that on the left, for that matter. It also doesn't matter. The heart of both parties is very much in favor. As far as the exploitation of this, though, absolutely. This is what Putin does for a living. He is trained to see weaknesses and then to try to exploit them. And I saw part of his end-of-year speech the other day and read some of that. And it is a perfect KGB/propaganda, saying things that have nothing to do with reality, but saying them in order to project what he wants to project and to influence the way other people think and behave. And he did that beautifully.
Absolutely. Before we go into the big global questions, let me ask you one last question, which of course is at the heart of every discussion we're having in Europe currently: American presidential elections.
Yes.
What should Europe
expect,
from these presidential elections? What is your predictions, and how can we prepare to the different scenarios unfolding?
Well, so the first thing is that elections are inherently unpredictable. Anything can happen over the next year. And if you think about the last few elections, last few presidential elections, the election itself was decided only in the last several weeks going into the election. So as much as we think we see things today, we simply don't know. Now, projecting where we are today, all the polls show that Donald Trump is leading the Republican Party by a lot. And
despite the many criminal cases that are ongoing, felony...
Exactly. That actually helps him. I don't know if it was a deliberate tactic to try to help him or not, but the result is that it helps him, because it allows him to portray the Justice Department and the FBI as weaponized by the Democrats against him, and if it's against him, it could be against all Republicans, all conservatives.
But
he
was there any
uses this.
choice? Should we have not prosecuted obvious
I think
felonies?
what I would have preferred to have seen would be to build a stronger case first. So because you're not only trying someone in a court of law, because he's a former president and a very public figure and now a presidential candidate, you really ought to have a case that is convincing publicly before you really go after it. And I think we're going through, like the first one, the one in New York about calling the payoff to a former porn star to keep quiet about an affair as a campaign finance violation. Well, that might be technically true, but it doesn't carry any water with the public. The public said, we already knew about that. He admitted he did it, we knew that he did it, we elected him president. Why is this now being treated as a crime?
But there's many other cases.
Well,
the
the
question
classified
of election
documents one,
tampering,
the
potential
classified
Georgia
documents
classified
in
documents.
Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah.
So yes, that is probably the most clear-cut case where it was a violation of law, except that he claims that he was the president. All of the authority to classify documents derives from his authority as president, so he declassified them. It's a kind of it's a flippant argument, but that's what he's saying as a defense. And then that is compounded by the fact Biden had the same thing in his garage. So people look at this and say, look, the FBI barges into his house in Mar-a-Lago, they have a search warrant, they go through everything, and it's a very, early morning operation, whereas the Justice Department is, very polite, working with the Biden family and saying, can you please give us this? Can you look for this? So very different standards is what the public sees. And
on the Georgia vote, trying to find 10,000 votes and calling.
This is the one that is the most interesting because it is ongoing. It is a state case, not a federal case, so he can't pardon himself out of this one. And his own lawyers have pleaded guilty in Georgia to things that they did. So it'll be very interesting to see as this goes to trial, are they able to build a case that he was trying to falsify the vote in Georgia that the public finds convincing? His defense will be, I believed that more people voted for me and those votes were not being counted. So I told them, go find the votes. What they did to accomplish that, that was their thing. That's what his defense will be. And I just hope that if they're going to pursue this, that they actually have really good evidence that is convincing publicly. Because if it's not, it will yet be another one of these cases that allows him to say, this is a witch hunt, is what he says. This is a witch hunt, they're going after me because they don't like me.
Well, and that leaves us with the big question. How can we prepare? I understand you are betting that Donald Trump will become the candidate.
No, that's what I wanted to come back to. So that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if you look at it today, he is at the top of the Republican polls, so would get the Republican nomination. And he is leading in polls in a head-to-head contest with Joe Biden. Now,
which is the more worrying part.
Right. But several things can happen. It's a year away, and anything can happen here. The first thing to look at is whether Nikki Haley is able to generate momentum in order to defeat Donald Trump. And it's a combination of perhaps people not wanting all the baggage and all the court cases, and if something is actually convincing as criminal bad behavior, people may want to look for something else. I think that his support, as I said, cruising around 50%, maybe a third of that is really diehard people who love Donald Trump. And maybe 2/3 is more the belief that he will win, so we're going to support our candidate. If she establishes herself as someone who can win, that she's viable, that could actually help support snowball, because then say, well, then we'd rather have her without all the baggage. And she correctly points out she's a younger generation, she's female, child of immigrants, and when you look at the head-to-head polling of her against Joe Biden, it is a far larger gap by which she wins as compared to Donald Trump.
Interesting. And yet she has a very small support of the party
she's probably tied for second in Iowa and clearly in second place in New Hampshire. She's picked up some major donors lately. She got the endorsement of the governor of New Hampshire. So her star is rising. The question is, does it rise fast enough and high enough to make a difference?
Yeah.
And we don't know this yet, but that's one thing to watch. The other is that if Trump does become the nominee, that will have the effect of firing up the Democrats to vote against him. Right now, what we're seeing is a referendum on Biden himself, where there is very low energy in the Democratic Party for him. His approval ratings are the lowest.
And you don't see an option where the Democrats change their candidate?
There is also an option. It's not normal. It's too late for him to step out and another candidate to step in and win the primaries. So he'll be running in the primaries and win the primaries. There's no real opposition. Then you get to the convention in August. And it is theoretically possible that at the convention he could decide not to pursue his candidacy any further, which would have the effect of those delegates who are pledged to vote for Joe Biden at the convention now being free to vote for anybody. And this could allow a situation where a different candidate emerges at the convention, who is then selected by the delegates and then goes on to run in the election. That's never been done in modern times, and it would be very controversial if that happened, because now it's no longer the people voting for it. It's an elite group within the Democratic Party voting for it. But it is possible. And then we don't know, honestly, it depends who the person is and how people react to this, whether that would be any better for the Democratic Party or not. So it's there's just
some polling shows that even a generic Democratic candidate does better than Joe Biden when it comes to the contest with Donald Trump.
Yes, but the thing is, there is never a generic candidate.
Of course.
It's always a person.
Of course.
And generic allows people to project onto it
Absolutely.
Whatever they think.
Absolutely.
So the progressives will say, yes, a generic Democrat is a progressive. And the moderates will say, yes, a generic Democrat is a moderate. And then once you have an actual person, then it divides again.
Yeah. Good point.
If Nikki Haley were to win, I think you would have the most robust and normal American administration we've seen for a long time. She's very strong on national defense, on national security. She's conservative fiscally, conservative socially. I think she would be a very recognizable Republican leader. If it's Joe Biden, I think you're going to see more of the same style of leadership that we've seen over the last 4 years. And, there will continue to be discussion about his health, but that I think we know what we're getting with Joe Biden. And if it's Donald Trump, I think we don't know, to be honest. I think that he
and here we move to our first question.
Yeah.
What if
what if?
Donald
He's very
Trump
transactional. He hasn't said very much about what he would do other than dismantle the Justice Department and the FBI and start drilling for oil and gas again. Those are the things that he would do.
Yeah.
We don't know how he would really handle Ukraine. All he has said is it wouldn't have happened if he was president, and if he is president, he'll end the war in a day. But
well, there are ways to end the war in a day. Stop providing assistance to Ukraine, and Putin will win in a day.
But he hasn't said that. Ramaswamy has said that. But Donald Trump has not said that. And if you remember, during his presidency, he was the one who actually started providing arms to Ukraine. Because the Obama administration...
The Republican administration, yes.
Yeah, the Obama administration had a ban on arms to Ukraine, and Trump reversed it and started providing them the javelins back in 2017, which now in hindsight, I'm awfully glad this was done because it gave the Ukrainians...
But my understanding was that it was actually done against his wishes. It was more of a No,
No, that's not
the
right.
Congress actually pushed.
No, that's not right. I pushed, Mike Pompeo pushed, Jim Mattis pushed, and Trump made the decision. Now, yes, the Congress also pushed, but this doesn't happen without the president approving it. And so, and the question that he had was not about the merits of providing lethal weapons. He was happy to give them lethal weapons. He wanted to know if they're going to pay us back. So he viewed this as a transaction. And the argument was that that's not the way foreign military financing works. We provide this as assistance, but then they will have the training, they'll have the equipment, and they can buy more. So they can buy later. And consider it like a starter kit. And he found that to be a good idea.
So you're saying that the fears that we hear in Berlin, in Paris, in Warsaw, regarding the worst case scenario in which Trump decides to even potentially pull out of NATO, but definitely pull out of Ukraine altogether, you think they're unfounded? Founded?
What I would say is we don't know, and therefore don't make any assumptions.
So how do we prepare?
So three steps. 3 steps. 1, do not make any assumptions. He hasn't said what he would do. You're reacting to the personality. You're reacting to the attitude. Don't do that. Don't react with emotion. Don't make any assumptions. Second, do your own homework. If you're Europe, as Poland is doing, spend at least 2% or more on defense.
We're spending 4.
Yes. Figure out what policies you think should be implemented, how you are going to go about implementing them. Do your own homework so you're ready. And then propose things. Step 3, propose things. Don't wait to see, well, what's Trump going to do, and then react against it. Be proactive. With your own homework done, propose things. Here's what we think we should do. We're ready to do this. Will you join us in this? Or if not, what can we do?
Yeah.
And I'm reminded of Shinzo Abe, may he rest in peace. When Trump was first elected, Shinzo Abe got on an airplane as fast as he could and went to Mar-a-Lago and played golf with Donald Trump. And they started off with a good relationship. And some of our European friends, some no longer in office now, but at the time, did exactly the opposite. They went in very public ways, criticizing Trump, bemoaning the fact that he's president, despairing about what his policies would be. And of course, he's going to react negatively to that, which he did. And so he had a very bad relationship with a few other major allies as compared with what he had with Japan. So don't make any assumptions and don't react. Do your homework, make proposals.
Although you do understand that, if you watch Russian TV, you know that this is what Russia is betting for, a Trump presidency, which of course tells us in the region, we usually know that what Russia wants is
bad
something
for
we
us.
don't. That's a very easy way of...
It's true. It's true. That's certainly what the Russians want, because they are hoping that he will do exactly as you say. He'll put NATO into some kind of deep freeze. He'll pull out of Ukraine and just give Russia half, or the territory they already control. But the reality is they don't know that either. They were not happy when Trump closed down their consulate in San Francisco. They weren't happy when he threw out about 60 spies from New York and Washington. They weren't happy when he increased the sanctions, including trying to shut down Nord Stream 2. They weren't happy when he gave arms to Ukraine. So he tried to keep, and I'm not defending this, but he tried to avoid saying anything bad about Putin and tried to keep a personal line of communication with Putin, but then also authorized all these steps to push back on Russia. And frankly, I don't know what he would do this time. I don't think he's thought it through. And I don't think the Russians know either. They're just hoping that he would be
Absolutely.
beneficial.
So, Kurt, I would like to conclude our discussion with my last question, which, again, I think will be of interest to the Polish audience. What is the reception of the recent Polish election results here? I mean, it has been 2 months, but as you know, the government has been formed only this week. So it is the first days that the government is actually in office. Is there, any reaction in Washington? Does it matter? What is your reading of the situation?
So I guess in the last year and a half, the U.S.-Polish relationship has really been defined by our working together to help Ukraine. And Poland has become the jumping off point for everybody going to Ukraine. It's become the logistics hub for military assistance. It has been one of the leaders, and truly a leader in Europe, when it comes to helping Ukrainian refugees, defining EU policy, all kinds of means for working to help Ukraine. And I'm pretty sure that's going to continue under the current government, maybe even more. And that's going to mean that the U.S. relationship is going to stay on this very close and collaborative track that it has been on for the past few years.
So you're optimistic regardless?
I am optimistic. And I think one of the things that we should not do as the United States is get too involved in any country's domestic politics. I mean, everybody's a democracy. Everybody has their own discussions. We should not be in the middle of that. But on these bigger questions like how is the U.S.-Polish partnership working on helping Ukraine, pushing back on Russia, working together to support the Baltic states, strong U.S.-EU relationship, NATO enlargement. These are all things we should be working together on.
Absolutely. Well, a fascinating year in front of us, 2024. So let me take the opportunity to wish you and our viewers a good, peaceful 2024. Let all the worries subside and fade, and all the optimistic scenarios come to life. Kurt, thank you very much for being with us. Merry Christmas, and we hope to have you back next year to Warsaw.
Merry Christmas, happy holidays, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much.